name is Alyssa.
And I'm Tony.
And we are the Sultry Sisters. We're a community-based organization that empowers women to live healthy and creative lives in North County, San Diego, and recently DC.
We curate events, workshops, mixers, and meetups centered around women's arts, wellness, and sisterhood.
Our mission is to empower women to live vibrant and shine bright through creative expression and conscious holistic living.
Our vision is to create a safe space that provides women the arts and wellness resources that are affordable and accessible.
So far, we partnered with Dancing So Boutique, Village Rock Shop, Carlsbad Village Yoga Co-op, and nonprofit organization Leap to Success. To find out more information about us and to sign up for our future events, visit sultrysisters.com.
You can also find us on social media on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at Sultry Sisters.
We hope to see you soon.
Hey.
Hello, y'all. It's October. We're here back with our Sultry Sister Hangout, and we are continuing our book club, and we're excited to see y'all here.
Yes, and we can tell why I'm in a plain space is because I'm in California. So as you all know, we've been sharing that we had our Out of the Boondocks premiere. So that's why I'm in California. So we had our premiere last week. We had our Twerk or Treat social.
Yes, we've been doing lots of fun things here while Tony is here on the West Coast, the best coast. So while you're tuning in, as you're getting settled, we want to talk about and share where you're tuning in from and what you're sipping on. So I'm, of course, tuning in from San Diego, and I'm sipping on a little bit of a sparkling lemonade. It's like a mix of Sprite and pink lemonade. And I put it in this cute glass to be classy for our book club.
I might just have ice water here because it's still very hot in California.
So if you're new to our Sultry Hangout, you're probably like, book club, what is this? Why a book club? Why do y'all do this? So why we do our book club, our goal for our book club is to choose books that promote soul care and align with the work that we do as Sultry Sisters. The discussions are an opportunity for us to share our reflections and work through the book of choice together. All are welcome, whether you're reading the book along with us, where you're a fellow soul care enthusiast, or haven't yet read the book. We want you to join the discussion. So we welcome everybody from avid readers to soul care enthusiasts. If you are tuning in via replay, let us know if you're listening via your walks. We also do a step and stride challenge, which is a virtual walking challenge. So make sure to visit sultrysisters.com and follow us on all social media platforms to learn about our other programming additional to our community book club.
Yes. So welcome. And so we have someone joining us today. So we have Kyle Moore tuning in from Wheaton and sipping on some sweet tea. Hello, welcome. And if anyone else is joining in live, you can comment below where you're tuning in from and what you're sipping on. And also, if you're watching the replay, you can as well.
Yes. So the month is October, and what we are doing the month of October is we are focusing on all things relationships. So last month in September, we focused on friendships and we read the book Platonic. So this month we are continuing that conversation and we're reading the book How We Show Up, which talks about reclaiming our relationships with family, friendships, and community. So we just really wanted to continue. And actually, Kyle recommended that book for us.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of our last book club. So with that recommendation, we definitely wanted to honor that. And it was just perfect timing, I think, to pair these books together, especially because this book is more conversational. It has a lot of stories that we can kind of share and talk deeper into the nuances of our relationships in our lives.
Yeah, so this book club is going to be a lot more informal than our previous ones. Like we'll have some quotes from the book, but a lot of it is going to be a discussion based on what we're talking about. So it's about, exploring non-traditional relationships and what does that look like. And a fun announcement is that our book club, we wanted to streamline it and making the experience a lot more easy for you all. So if you haven't already, you can join our online book club through the book club's website. And I'm going to add
Mhm.
the link below. And it's free, and it's just a way for us all to stay connected, for you to get updates. You'll even get an alert when we go live. So you'll remember. So you'll get an alert like a week before and a day before,
Mhm.
um, to make sure you don't forget. And of course, our replays are up on YouTube, but through the bookclubs.com website, or you can join the app. It's just a way for you all to know what we're currently reading, books that we want to read in the future, and then you can also see all of our previous books that we read over the years.
Yes. Speaking of staying connected, we have some upcoming events happening in the sultry community. Tony, this Sunday, will be teaching a soul flow yoga class. And then in November 19th, we'll be having our annual sustainable swap. We had our second one last year here in San Diego, and we look forward to having that again. It's going to be in Carlsbad. So be sure to get on our newsletter so that you are the first to know about signups. That's going live this week.
And so if you look at the comments, you'll see our book club link. You'll see I also put a link if you want to get a copy of the book. You can use our bookshop affiliate link below. And if you just want to look at our book list on Bookshop, I'm adding that link as well. And if you're like, what is Bookshop? So Bookshop is a online space that connects you with different indie independent bookshops all over the nation, and we're really about supporting local. So we have our own book list there. So if you click and buy anything from the Sultry book list, then we will get a little bit back, which will help
Mhm.
us continue to have this free programming, which is really awesome. And then also you'll just know like what books that we read if you're just joining now.
Exactly. And speaking of supporting the work that we do, if you're like, I already have the book or I checked the book out at the library, you can also just donate and support the work that we do by donating to Sultry Sisters on Venmo and PayPal. So that's another way to help us sustain our community work as we continue to have these Sultry hangouts for y'all here in the ether on the web.
Yes, so thank you all for tuning in. So before we dive into the book, we did want to just ask everyone, what does true, authentic family and community look like to you? So before you read the book, or before we actually get into the book, like what does just family and community mean? Do you want to share, Alyssa?
Yeah, sure. When I'm thinking about um, family and community, I think of people and places I go to feel that family, that close, that community. So my sister, of course, you, and Sultry Sisters. It looks like my close friend group, my close family group. Um, so that's what family and community looks like. It looks like gathering around food. For me, authentic family looks like showing up to do things like move, like Tony just moved to her new apartment. Authentic community looks like um, showing up to support someone that is either having a moment in life, a graduation, a coming of age, a birthday. So simple things like that to me represent authentic family, like celebrating like this, the little things in life, but just witnessing someone's growth. To me, that's what authentic family and community, because when I think about what significance my family and community has played for me, it's when they're there for my moments of growth. That's how I have those bookmarks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think similarly. Yeah, I think when I think of true, authentic family community, I also think of like the term chosen family, because
Mm,
like blood family doesn't always like, they don't always necessarily have to show up in the ways that individuals, that we feel is like what we actually want. So I feel like when you have a chosen family, that's that true, authentic people who you yourself are choosing to have in your life, and they
mhm,
also choose to be a part of your life. Um, and so that can be like friends, best friends, that can be,
mhm,
colleagues that become closer over the years as you interact with them. And yeah, I think it's people showing up into times that are really important.
Mhm.
And I think the true and authentic part too is like you're able to just be yourself. You don't have to like perform or like have a mask of like who you are. Like these people, I feel like for me, know like the true, authentic Tony. Like I can just be myself. Um, and it's also like reciprocal and mutual. I feel
Mhm.
like when I think of true and authentic, is that like it's that natural mutuality that like okay, if I
Mhm.
show up for someone, then like they would do the same for me or show up in a way that also is meaningful to me.
Yeah, it also makes me think of our Out of the Boondocks premiere that happened last week. We had
Mhm.
family show up, we had friends show up, we had colleagues showing up, we had text messages and phone calls because they were celebrating and witnessing like a milestone for Sultry Sisters. So for me, like it was a really cool moment to see to have folks who have been a part of Sultry Sisters and we've become friends with be a part of this momentous part. So
Mhm.
that also was a reflection of what it looked like. Looking around, it wasn't just our family,
Mhm.
it wasn't just our friends. It was people who also knew about us that we didn't know, but they knew of our work. And so it was cool to feel like we had family there, friends, and people who felt in community with us. And we were able to then make those introductions. So that was really cool.
Mhm. And then Kyle shares, it's the people who support and show up for when you need them. Exactly. And I think a lot of times that comes out in time. So whether you meet someone when you're a child or when you're an adult, I think through actions and that act of showing up, of caring, of showing love is how you find your true authentic community. Because if, just someone that you knew forever since you're a kid, if they're not showing up in the way that you want, then I think by way of like natural selection, they're taking
Mhm.
themselves out of your community.
Yeah, and I think the authentic community, it is that mutuality. It's not performative community like I'll do something for you if you do something for me. It's what they said in Platonic, like what we were saying. Over time, you will get something back. You already know and you trust that over time, when you need something, you can call on that person. It's not a trade. It's not a transactional thing. So to me, that's authentic family and community when the transaction is not a tit for tat. It's really just like I'm here because you need it, and I know that if when I need it, you're going to be here too.
And I think for what it's looked like for me has shifted over the years. I think especially in this last like year and a half, 2 years, like what community means to me is a lot more, I guess, a radical in the way that actually looks compared to traditional
Mm,
community and family, which we'll talk about in this book. And it just looks so much more expansive and abundant in the way that I'm able to create community and the way can have people show up for me and be a part of my life too. It's not just like, oh, these people are who you say is like your emergency contact or something. It's like, oh no, these people actually help me when I'm sick, right? They check on me when I'm going through mental health things. That's like it's the actual act of being in community. I think has really shifted for me in the last couple of years.
mhm. What's coming up now, as you're saying that, and as we're really like flushing through this communal definition, is like, remember the phrase, I want to feel seen, felt, and heard? Like when you feel seen, felt, and heard, I think that's what authentic family and community, that's when you're in that authentic family and communities, when you feel like you're seen, felt, and heard.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. So we'll keep discussing this as we go on through how we show up. But the first chapter, or I guess we can share a little bit more about Mia
Oh
Birdsong,
yes.
right? Because we
Hmm.
haven't, yeah.
Yes, exactly. So let us know in the comments if you've read this book before, or if you're a first time reader, let us know in the chat. Just let you know that we're going to be meeting every week, except for at the beginning of November. We'll have to skip because we'll be in Puerto Rico. And all that good stuff. But yeah, more about Mia Birdsong. Mia Birdsong is a family activist who advocates for the strengthening of communities and the self-determination of low-income people. As a pathfinder, writer, and facilitator, she steadily engages the leadership and wisdom of people experiencing injustice to chart new visions of American life. She has a gift for making visible and leveraging the brilliance of everyday people so that our collective gifts reach larger spheres of influence, cultural and political change, and create well-being for everyone. You can learn more about Mia Birdsong on their website. You can look them up on YouTube. They also have like lots of interviews. So definitely familiarize yourself with the author. I think that's something that I've really enjoyed about being a part of the Sultry Book Club, is doing the behind this, not the behind the scenes, but the background intake of the author, because that really informs the context of how they write and what they're writing about.
So definitely check out Mia Birdsong. She also has an Instagram, so if that's more easily for you to access. And the book, so I read the book in the springtime through audiobook. So this is a good book that you just want to listen to. That's totally fine. Or like Alyssa said, you can check out from your local library, or you can check out our bookshop and order it there. And then we have Kyle here sharing that he's read it and loved it. Yes, and you've recommended it to me personally. Krista also recommended it to me, and then now we have it for our Sultry Book Club. So it's really, we do really enjoy when you all show us recommendations, because it helps us, expand our horizons of what we're reading and bring it to our community as well.
Yes. So shall we get started? Shall we start with chapter 1? So if you have the book or you have your notes, we're going to get started with chapter 1, When Failure Leads Us Home, The Trap of the American Dream. And this chapter opens with a James Baldwin quote. So I'm going to read that for you. A country is only as strong as the people who make it up, and the country turns into what the people want it to become. James Baldwin. So great way to ground us in this chapter.
And so chapter 1 is When Failure Leads Us Home, The Trap of the American Dream. So we're really kind of debunking a lot of these collective myths of like what the American dream is, what that looks like, and what does that mean for home or for our own individual communities.
So the first quote to share is, "The American dream is both an illusion and an aspiration. It is a false promise and real potential. It is a jumble of contradictions. The founding fathers wrote powerfully about freedom and self-governance while inhabiting stolen land, enslaving people, and excluding most of the population from participating in that self-governance." So that's something to know. Like, it's, when we think about community, me and Tony and most of our social community that we know of are American. So that's like the community that we're in, right? And so I think it's important for me to have a critical lens on the community in which we live in, because I do, just like James Baldwin says, I want to turn it into what I want it to become, and not just be of the systems in which I live and grew up under.
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to move my quote around because something got mixed up. But
no worries.
I guess we can go into the other quotes you have about the American dream first, so we can cover all of those.
Yeah, another one I want to share is, "The American dream remains defined by whiteness and masculinity. No matter who occupies the role, our most rewarded and celebrated leaders, even if they are not straight white men, exemplify these standards and become its held up in its ideal we should all want to achieve. We've all been socialized to reach for it. Perhaps most damaging it excludes a toxic individualism that creates barriers to deep connection and intimacy. When we orient towards doing it ourselves and getting ours, we cut ourselves off from the kind of relationships that can only be built when we allow ourselves to be open and generous. Sorry, y'all, I'm reading it from the ticker. Tony and I this time are working with electronic book versus the actual book. So that's why sharing these quotes for me is a little bit of struggle. But the point for those sharing that quote is how the American dream has gotten us to have this toxic level of individualism versus that collective community. And to know, like, that's why sometimes it's hard to cultivate community when we've been kind of pushed towards individualism and isolating ourselves to just our nuclear family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a question I wanted for everyone to answer, and you can put in the comments, but what is the American dream you were taught or conditioned to want to achieve? Because in this chapter, she goes through different examples of things that, what the American dream can be. And so for me, I feel like what I was conditioned the American dream is like working hard, going to college, like that's the American thing. Okay, you're gonna go to college, get a degree, get a good job, whatever that means. Um, then get married, have kids, and like own a home and that kind of stuff. I feel like that's what is like packaged. It's like, oh, when people have these things, when they check off all these boxes, it's like, oh, they're living the dream. So yeah, I feel like that's what, ever since I was younger, that's kind of what I've seen people be like regarded as having the dream.
Yeah. For me, what I was conditioned through the American dream is I shouldn't need anybody. Like, I shouldn't need anybody to be successful. I shouldn't need anybody. And therefore, that means I'm an adult. So, like, that mentality is like, you're an adult when you don't need anybody. And because I don't live by that value, like, I do believe that I need people emotionally, like, communally, resourcefully. Sometimes I'll like tell myself, like, well, I guess I'm not an adult. I guess I'm freaking Peter Pan because I don't feel like I still feel like I need others. And so that's an unlearning for me of the American conditioning, of the American dream that's conditioned me to be like, bitch, you really need to not need anybody. Like, that's the voice in my head. Like, when I go to therapy, like, who's that voice? I was like, I don't know, Uncle Sam, because it's not like, it's not a person that told me this, but I feel this strong like influence to like not need anybody, to have that hyper independence.
Yeah, I've also learned over the years that hyper independence is also a trauma response. So I think a lot of us also experience trauma and then end up being hyper independent. Because I identify as that too. I'm always like, I got myself, whatever. I don't need anyone, which I have been unlearning over the last couple of years. But it's definitely hard. And so, yeah, I feel like the American dream essentially brings in like, it highlights and puts on a pedestal toxic individualism, and then it equates that individualism with the nuclear family. So that's just having like two parents, usually heterosexual, and then like two kids, is usually what like the nuclear family ideal is, which is very like not actually like realistic, but like I feel like in this chapter she's bringing up that like, oh, a lot of these things were conditioned, so it's like conditioned to think it's normal, like, okay, yeah, when it's really like, I think hopefully through reading this book over the next month, we'll all be able to just self-reflect on like, is this what I truly want, or is this what, society has taught me to want? And I think that's where the beauty is when you know that you're doing it for your own reasons and in a healthy way, and not because you feel like you have to do the thing.
And so, for answering the question of what has the American dream conditioned you, Kyle shares, I think that the idea of the American dream really does serve the interest of capitalism, but doesn't serve people nor their families well. And then you think of school, job, marriage, home, kids, and maybe a retirement. But the way that's constructed doesn't value or leave much room for a thicker community than spouse, kids, and perhaps coworkers. Yeah.
Exactly, because like the way society is set up now, if there's anything that you're experiencing, you're supposed to go to your spouse and they're supposed to help you with it, or you're supposed to, if your kids need something, the direct parents have to help them with it. And it's like, that's a lot. That's a lot to carry. And she talks about this in the book of like, then as your partners then absorbs like 70 roles of like not only being, your sex partner, but your romantic partner, your
Mhm.
therapist, your financial person who you talk about finances with, your person to go to for fun, your emergency contact for medical emergencies, your travel buddy, like all this stuff. And it's like, okay, that's a lot. And then co-parent if you have kids.
Mhm.
And it's like, how is just two people in a nuclear, heterosexual dynamic supposed to, embody all of these different roles in our lives. And I think that is why a lot of folks, end up having, um, mental health issues because then they feel like they have to be like perfect. Or
Mhm.
also then, the kids or the people in their lives, I feel like, oh, what did she also mentioned how like then they become isolated, right? So
Yes.
like this toxic individualism is like, okay, this nuclear family can handle everything by themselves. And even though we know like our neighbors are having COVID or their kids, are going through something or the parents are going through a divorce, it's like, oh, they're going to handle it over there. And then people don't just lend themselves to be like, hey, do you need support right now? Do you need me to take the
Mhm.
kids and we're going to go to the park while you and your partner handle something? Or do you need time away and you just need like a little retreat? Like that's, in my opinion, I don't think that's normalized in society for like other adults to like intervene and want to either co-parent children as well, or to even just help your friends. I feel like even it's more normal now, I guess, for people to check in with their friends, but I still think it's still superficial. Like I don't think a lot of people are like, hey, I'm gonna come over and wash your laundry for you because I know you're having a depressive episode, right? I don't think a lot of people go into that type of community showing up.
Mhm. And like goes into like this part of safety, belonging, care in traditional family dynamics. I think, you know, M- Mia Birdsong, she talks about like we should learn safety, belonging, and care from our family. But what happens when we don't experience those dynamics? Where do
Mhm.
we get those examples from? And so I think that's also like it's related to like the book Platonic. It's like when how where are we getting these models from? Where are we getting these references? And if all you know is what you know, it's kind of hard to recreate. It's easy to recreate the dynamic in which you live in versus to find a new one, which brings us to this quote: without accessible, celebrated models of what happiness, purpose, connection, and love look like outside the American dream model, we are pulled towards the American dream. Like, so we can't, how can we counter it without these examples? So that's exactly why
Mhm.
we're having this conversation with this book, because we want to define that for ourselves.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think when you think of safety, when you think of traditional family dynamics and safety, belonging, and care, it's kind of assumed that your nuclear
Safe.
family provides safety, is a space of belonging, and cares for you, which we've learned that, especially in like Bell Hooks and All About Love, that, especially when you think about kids and like abuse, like
Hmm.
love and abuse don't coexist. But I
No.
think a lot of our families want us to believe that this abuse is an act of love, but that compromises our safety, right? Like if we're experiencing abuse in our household, then it's not safe,
Yeah.
and then we don't feel like we belong, right? So it's
Mhm.
like this American dream kind of forces us to assume that our blood family and relatives are automatically going to provide this for us when sometimes people don't have the tools to
Mhm.
actually give that, especially when you're young.
Yeah, I feel like it also assumes it has us assume certain roles. Like children don't always have their own autonomy because like you're a child, so like you don't
Mhm.
really have much choice. I think like how are you safe when you don't have choice like in certain little things? And I think that's sometimes like in these books that we've been reading, like looking back at childhood, I'm like, dang, like how can parents be more how could a parent be more responsible to create that safety
Mhm.
by providing autonomy for a child to say if they want to hug somebody, if they want to wear
Mhm.
something, if they want to eat something, how they're feeling. I feel like the American dream doesn't even create a script to even have those type of meaningful conversations with a child of what they want to do today. You know, it's just like, you're
Mhm.
going to do this because you're going to go to school, you're going to go to college, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be these things. Like, we don't have these open-ended, the American dream doesn't provide open-ended prompts for people to discover themselves.
Mhm. Which I think kinda Kyle's comment touches on. He's like, so the things that he mentioned earlier, like school, job, marriage, home, kids, they're not necessarily, none of these are bad. It's just
Mhm.
insufficient, isolating, and insecure if that's all you have or the only way to think things can be. Exactly. I
Mhm.
think that, especially in this book, I think Mia Birdsong is just sharing with us that, like, there's more to life than just, what this American dream is, or we'll get into other types of dynamics too, but that life can be so much more expansive that we really can choose how we want to show up for people, how we want
Mhm.
people to show up in our lives. And there's just a lot of different examples. So, like, the rest of
Mhm.
the chapters of the book that we'll read really does highlight and illuminate like these different types of dynamics that are deemed non-traditional, but that can be actually very fulfilling, and reassuring for folks if you feel like the traditional dynamics and American dream didn't feel right for you. And so that goes
Mhm.
into kind of our next topic, which is like biological versus chosen family, which I kind of touched upon earlier. But
Mhm.
yeah, the American dream, just again to reiterate, it like really does focus on biological family. Like, okay, if your parents birth you, then that's your nuclear family, and y'all will stay together. Y'all do everything. This is who you have to depend on. And then chosen family is typically, the people who you choose to want to have in your life and who show up for you in the ways that you, consent to, what feels good for you, what's really affirming. So that's kind of the dynamic between those two types of families.
Mhm. Oh yes, when I think of biological versus chosen, when I think of like when it's in a toxic state, I feel like sometimes the biological family doesn't always have the accountability culture that a chosen family could have, because you can create that. Um, I also think for me, when I think about chosen family, that has been a part of my healing. Like, part of my healing journey has really, like you said, Tony, earlier, curating our chosen family, kind of like Sultry Sisters. Like, people ask us, we were at a Hera Hubs grand opening the other day, and we were just talking to folks, introducing ourselves as Sultry Sisters, but we don't always tell people that we're biological sisters. And people were like, wait, are y'all biological sisters? We're like, yes, we are biological sisters, but you don't have to be biological sisters or biological family to be part of the Sultry fam or a Sultry
Hmm.
sister. So that's really important for us here at Sultry to really highlight that chosen community, chosen family. We happen to be biological sisters, but that's not the bond that holds us the most together.
Yeah, honestly, growing up, we weren't that close because we're
No.
so many years apart. So yeah, being biological doesn't determine closeness.
Mm-mm. No.
And yeah, I think what I think is beautiful about chosen family is that, yeah, it's that choice, is that agency, that autonomy to be like, no, I'm choosing to be a part of this family, right? And I think we've had a few examples of that growing up when, like, in our family we do have people we call cousins or aunties and things like that who maybe are like our our parents friends, or our, even if we made friends first and their parents then got connected to our parents, and then have been in our lives like for a while. Like, we have had different examples of that, of like people who weren't necessarily our blood family that became like a family because our parents are military and they moved away from their biological families. So we have had some models of that growing up. I just think as an adult, I really am like pushing for that kind of
Mhm.
family, as like, okay, I have a choice on like who I can choose to be around.
Yeah. And I think Mia Birdsong touches on that in the book too, talking about how Black and Brown communities aren't new to chosen family. It's very
Hmm.
much a part of like how we've been able to sustain and survive, like
Hmm.
being in America, or, being, yeah.
Hmm.
So I'm like, I appreciated her also stating that, like, we're not new to this chosen family thing. Like, just to let you
Hmm.
know, this is a thing that has sustained us.
Yeah. I feel like I'm not sure growing up if I heard of that term chosen family, but I had always known of like, oh, like that's your auntie or your cousin, even though I knew we weren't like blood related. So yeah, I think
Mhm.
that's really like beautiful about a lot of our communities, especially communities of color. I think we have practiced these different values before. But essentially everything we've just touched on is what Mia Birdsong calls the mirage of security that the American dream supposedly is supposed to give, right? So this mirage that it's like not really there, it's a fantasy, it's a mask. So I appreciate that like terminology, the mirage of
Mhm.
security,
Yes.
because I think for a lot of folks, myself included, like when you grow up and you are taught, like, okay, this is like the path you're supposed to go down, even let's say just going to college and getting a job, like that was taught to me as a young person that, like, oh, if you do that, you're going to get a good job and you're going to be set for life.
Mhm.
And
If
I'm
you're
like,
yeah. If you
looking at
do
the
if
economy
you do what
now,
you're
I'm like,
told, did you remember that? If you
yeah,
do what you're told, you'll get what, you get what you deserve. And I'm like, in my adult life, I've heard that is not a quote that I live by. And talking about the mirage of security, aka the American dream, Mia Birdsong talks about freedom and like the root word of where freedom comes from and friendship and freedom means like beloved. And when I think about America, when they're like, oh, what's American slogan? Land of the free, home of the brave. I'm just like, okay. Then she takes, and I'm like, I don't really agree with that. And she gives this other definition, which I appreciate and which really allows me to look at America and our community with a critical lens is freedom is the idea that together we can ensure that we all have the things we need: love, food, shelter, and safety. That's freedom, y'all. So when we talk about liberation, when we talk about freedom, we're talking about the yearning and search to have love, food, shelter, and safety. And notice most of those things are basic needs. Like they're not tall orders. So when we say we want freedom, when we say we want human rights, when we say we want these things, it's not this far thing. They try to make freedom seem like this complex concept that is like out of reach that we're constantly striving for, and we have to go to international waters to find it. You really don't. So when we talk about freedom and liberation, it's really not that deep. It's really, if we really embodied collective liberation, we would be wanting to ensure that everyone has love, food, shelter, and safety. And that does not cost billions of dollars. So that's my soapbox. I'm just saying. I appreciate her like really making it that simple. Like when you think of freedom, she's offering this definition that is not sugar coated and in the mirage of security. It's
mhm.
really just radical. It's at the root.
Did you want to go into your next quote that you
Oh,
have here?
yes. And then the next quote I want to share is talking more about accountability. So, accountability is more about ourselves in the context of the collective. It is seeing the way we cause hurt or harm as actions that indicate we are not living in alignment with values that recognize our own humanity or the humanity of others. So, accountability. So when I say these things, like what it means to be accountable for ourselves and our community, it means to understand um, how our actions may be harmful to another and how that's not aligned. If your values are freedom, well, how are our actions? How are we being accountable for making sure that we are supporting a community that has love, food, shelter, and safety? So I think a lot of folks, when we have that isolation, when we have that individualism, individualism doesn't embody or include accountability, because like that's not my family. I don't know them. They don't affect me. But accountability, when we talk about that, it is about the community. It's making sure that we are aware of how other people are being harmed by our actions, and knowing that it can happen, and that we are willing to step outside of ourselves to align ourselves with the greater good. And that might mean inconveniencing ourselves by acknowledging someone else's pain It's not easy to acknowledge someone else's pain. It really isn't, because then it brings up ours. It's not an easy thing to do. So I think that's why I wanted to share that quote, because in order for us to find freedom in community, we also have to embrace accountability, and that is not easy.
And I think it's like when you think back to the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, when people were just hoarding all the toilet paper, N95 masks, all that kind of stuff, um, and frozen foods is like really unfortunate to see, because it's like, yeah, they're the people who are doing that were not thinking about the larger community, right? They're just thinking about, oh, my home needs all these things, so I want to stock up, in case the world ends. And it's like, well, what about everyone else? Like, don't you think other people also need things in their home? So, yeah, I do feel like, unfortunately, the US specifically still has a long way to go as a collective
Mhm.
in unlearning that toxic individualism and opening up, ourselves as a society to, like, the collective and community in a broader sense. Again, I think in our micro communities we are doing it, but as a large in society,
Mhm.
unfortunately, I think we have a long way um, to go, which goes into like the next topic I wanted to highlight. So Mia Birdsong talks about like this expansive family community, right, which we've kind of already touched upon. But this section kind of really talked about kind of the why, expanding what the definition of family is important. It's not just like, oh, because it feels good and it's nice to have more people, who are supporting you. It's like, no, this is actually like really important for our well-being.
Mhm.
But I see a comment. Okay, so Kyle says it's definitely a prerequisite to us getting free. Yes, so accountability
Mhm.
definitely is a prerequisite, just because, yeah, how can you show up in a way that is, meeting these needs if you're not self-aware? So I think, yeah, a lot of this work is, in tangent with like, becoming more self-aware. And I think step one is just recognizing that, the American culture has indoctrinated a lot of us into wanting the American dream and the nuclear
Mhm.
family. And once you just acknowledge that, then I think then you can start
Y-
unlearning and
Yes.
relearning a lot of these concepts.
And part one, I would say, in the unlearning is, in sharing this quote, we long to give and receive support. So, as a person who is hyper
Mhm.
independent, as a person who is a DIY queen, and I wouldn't say I pride myself on doing that. I just feel like that's my only option. Like, I really do create an environment for myself to not do that. And so part of me is really holding on to this quote and like, yeah, we all long to give and receive support. So part of me unlearning is giving more support, because I feel like the more I
Mhm.
give support and not isolate myself and doing it myself, the more I can ask to receive. I think part of my interdependence is also just like keeping to myself too. Like I would say accountability for myself. Part of that unlearning is stepping outside of my comfort zone and going to someone saying, "Hey, how can I help you? What can I do for you? How can I support you at this time?" Versus like, you know what? I just got to do my thing. I got to work. So that's
Mhm.
my part one in this unlearning.
Mhm. Definitely. And then Kyle also comments, right, the toxic idea is that the only people you need to be accountable to are yourself and your nuclear family, when really it should be a broader community. Exactly. I think of when we think of, being eco-conscious and like recycling, right? I think some people are like, oh, like, what's the point? Like, I don't see like the products that get recycled. And it's like it's beyond that. It's for this global community, right? This broader community. So yeah, I think unfortunately it goes back to Kyle, what you said earlier, that capitalism, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think the American dream encompasses capitalism and encompasses white supremacy culture, which we'll talk about later. But it has all these things that we do talk about in society. I think, especially in our social community and like different things that we brought it up in different book clubs before. But when you realize that it can shape the way we create community. That's when I'm like, hold
Mm-hmm.
up, I do
Mm.
invite more folks to unlearn that, when it's like, okay, this is actually affecting how you relate to other people, how you give and receive support. Like it actually does impact us. Um, and I wasn't able to copy the full quote since this part I had listened to the
Mhm.
audio, but essentially the concept was social capital as a way to mitigate the experience of poverty. And in this part of the book, I appreciated Birdsong in, including this because I think, especially when we think of like communities of color, I think a lot of our families have used as social capital because some of us have experienced poverty. So it'd be like, okay, like my mom says in the Philippines, like someone would bring, okay, maybe the meat for the sinigang, like a soup, the meat. Someone else would bring, green leafy vegetables. Another person would bring some peppers. A different person would bring the rice. Another person is like actually cooking the meal, and then other people would bring maybe something else that would go along with the meal. So that collective community part of like even coming together for a meal was very regular when she was in the Philippines. And a lot of times, yes, they did value community, but a lot of times it was economical because, they also lived in poverty. So I appreciated Mia Birdsong putting this in the book to realize that our communities have done this before, but a lot of times it was out of survival and necessity. And now we can go beyond that, right? Like some of us are not currently living in poverty, but we still can, lean on the social capital of like helping out our neighbor, helping out our friend. Like when I moved to my new apartment, Janelle also recently moved to the DC area. So she allowed me to like, use some of her boxes, her suitcases, these like big bins to like put a bunch of my books in. And like even that kind of social exchange of like, okay, she knew I was moving and she had excess things, and then shared that with me. And then vice versa. Other times I'll give her like different things that I have. So I feel like, if you see that growing up of like sharing when you have extra of something, then as an adult, then it's easier for you to like recreate that in your own way.
Exactly. You literally is that the word synthesize or wrap that in your own way. So I'm looking at that section. You used your own
Yes.
examples to say that example. So good job,
Yay.
Tony. um and then she then follows that saying that people from um higher economic statuses, like they feel more lonely, and it's not that they don't have family and friends. They just, because of the American dream, they are like lonely and disconnected.
Hmm.
hmm And then there's a statistic that I wanted to share. Only half of us have daily meaningful connections with others. So think about this, like our society, specifically San Diego compared to DC, like I drive a car. So to go to work, I drive in a car by myself. Like there's a lot of isolation in like this suburban life. Like you live in a big house
Hmm.
away from the store, away from the town center. And when you go to work and all these things, you're always in a car. For me, I'm always in a car by myself. So what do I do when I'm in the car? I'm either listening to a podcast or talking to my sister or a friend, because like we yearn for that like connection. And so like I'll share this quote so we can kind of talk a little bit more and expand upon this. But only half of us have daily meaningful interactions with others, and at least 2 in 5 surveys sometimes are always feeling as though they lack companionship, 43%, and that their relationships are not meaningful, 43%, that they are isolated from others, and that they are no longer close to anyone, 39%. Only 26% of us know most of our neighbors, and a third of us have never even interacted with our neighbors. Not having deep connection is causing us mental and physical harm.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also we just read Platonic last month, and Platonic by Dr. Franco also mentions this, epidemic of loneliness that, especially in the U.S., we're experiencing, and how this really does impact our well-being. Not that it's just a good thing to have to be connected. It's like no, this is affecting our lives, our
Mhm.
health. and also our life expectancy, right? So loneliness, which we've talked about, yeah, in previous book clubs, and again, we're reading and how we show up is critical for our overall well-being. And I think as a collective, when you realize this is when we can create that collective change, right? Because we know why this is important. I think sometimes that's how we can hold ourselves accountable when we know the why. Because then it's like, okay, why am I doing this? Or why am I, wanting to make sure someone is doing this? Is to make sure we have a healthy life expectancy, um, which is not easy. And it's not an easy
Mhm.
thing for us to unlearn, but we're hoping through having these discussions that then you all can go in your communities, your micro communities, and have more discussions and more, and it'll just trickle down all through all of our communities. But I think it's really important too to mention there's another quick stat. So, one-fourth of us don't have people in our lives who understand us, right? So, when we're talking about this book of like living, life outside of the typical American dream, creating these non-traditional relationships, having chosen family, yeah, there might be people in your current life who don't support you, who don't understand that. They're like, "What are you talking about? Like, just hang out with your sister. Just go over there to your grandma's house." And you're like, "Hold up, like, yes, but like, or no." Maybe you're like straight, point blank, that does not work for me, and that's okay. And that's why we created this space too, so this can be a safe space for people to talk about. How you might be creating your own chosen family, how you might be unlearning some of these concepts that we're bringing up, so we hope that this space is helpful for people to feel like there's other people who understand them.
Exactly. And, before we segue into the next section, talking about like, so where do we go from here? Um, the American dream version of success has damaged our ability to relate to others. So where do we go from here? There are people and communities that have been creating these more holistic and well communities, and that's what we're about to talk about in this next section.
Hmm. So this next section I really wanted to highlight is the gift of non-traditional families, which I think is the beauty of what this book really is. You all will see as you continue with us for this next month. But this book is more so, I would say, like narrative style. So she really does just ask different people to share their experiences, the different kind of family dynamics, structures, relationships, friendships that they have. And through them sharing their stories, we're able to learn and unlearn from them. So the first thing I wanted to share is that connection isn't about a specific structure. It's about values, love, and care. And I think that's really nice to ground us too, to know that the different types of structures we'll see and hear about in the book does not have to be the ones that you choose for yourself, and that's okay. And it's not one size fits all at all. And that it really is about these values. And I think will be great too for all of us to think about as we journey through the book is like, what values do you want, right, in your life? And like, what is important for you? And that's how you'll be able to be more clear with when you meet people or the people who are already in your life to know if they align and affirm your values or if there's misalignment and maybe you need to do some restructuring in what's going on.
Hmm.
And oh, you touched upon this a little bit earlier, but Mia Birdsong brings up the gift of blackness. So she talks about like her and her own experiences as well, like growing up. That the gift of blackness is an expansive notion of family, right? Like having family beyond blood and law. So she mentioned having like play cousins, or an uncle that when you got to be an adult yourself, you realize that like, oh, they never were your blood relative. It just, your parents like chose to have that person in your life and in your family growing up. And I do feel that like as growing up, like in our Black family, there was definitely people
Hmm.
who was not blood related, but who was there, and who was really important to our parents or to our other relatives that you would just see around when you're growing up. And I also feel like in the Black community and in like communities of color, I think that's also like a term of endearment. Like if you are considered family, like oh yeah, that's my cousin, or that's auntie, whatever. It's like a respect thing too. So it's like to get that title if you are in our community is um really um it should be feeling like good.
Yes. It's like
Like,
when
yeah.
someone says, "Hey sis" to me, it's very enduring. Like I don't just be throwing out I mean, we're sultry sisters, yes, but like from the black community, I'm saying like but in the black community when you say
Yeah.
like "Hey sis," that's where it's coming from.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then even in our like Filipino family, like we have people who call auntie and uncle as well, who definitely are not a part of our
Yes,
blood
and
family tree, but they've been there since all the time I've
yes. And
known.
recently for me, like with my like with people who are Phil-Am and Filipino, I'll say kapatid, and that's like sibling. That means sibling. I know some people who say like hey sib, like to be short for sibling, and that's like again like creating that expansive connection with someone that's deeper than like hey friend. Saying hey sib, hey kapatid, hey sis is like
Mhm.
is showing a level of care and thought towards another person. It's like, you're safe here. You belong here. I'm thinking of you.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that underlyingly has that like, oh, we share
A
something, right? Like
common,
maybe we share a culture, maybe we share a common
mm-hmm.
activity,
Yes.
whatever it is, there's something that connects
An
us. With,
identity. Yes.
yeah, yeah, I think that's really important.
Mm-hmm.
And going still with this whole gift of non-traditional families, this is one of my favorite quotes so far in the book, but the gift of queerness, not queer like gay, queer like escaping definition, queer like some sort of fluidity and limitless all at once, queer like freedom too strange to be conquered, fear
Mm-hmm.
like the fearlessness to imagine what love can look like and pursue it, from poet Brandon Wench. And I
Mm-hmm.
just really appreciated, just the quote to outline, um, like when we talk about queers when reading this book, it's so expansive, right? Like they just start off, it's not just being gay, it's all these other things of escaping
Mm-hmm.
definition, of,
Mm-hmm.
unlearning, of, especially at
Unbound.
the, yeah, especially at the end of imagining what love can look like and pursue it. And I think that's what's so beautiful, especially in the queer community, is that like so many of us are creating lives and identities that like maybe didn't even exist before. We're creating it for
Mm-hmm.
ourselves, and it's so beautiful. And I think this part of the book for me was like that hopeful element that like yes,
Mm-hmm.
maybe we have been conditioned and we had learned and absorbed some of these toxic or unhealthy ways of thinking about family community, but also there's so much hope, and we can look to certain communities, especially like the queer community, of like how really like boundaries and limits do not exist. Like whatever you want to create, you can, and you have freedom in that, and that there are also other people wanting and seeking that kind of community that you can find, a lot of times in queer communities.
Mm-hmm. And Kyle shares fam. Yes, using the word fam. We say sultry fam. And then sultry mama, she's in the house. She's live with us. She says creating your work family or military family. Mm-hmm.
Mhm,
This is going into like all those spaces, y'all. We talk about like your first space, your
mhm,
home, your second space, your work, and third space, your
mhm,
community spaces. So yes, all those
mhm.
things.
Yeah, and I think again, when we think of, this gift of non-traditional families, again, the hopefulness is that we can dream of more for ourselves, right? Maybe we didn't see it growing up, or you don't see it around the people you are around currently. Like you still can dream and use your imagination.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to share this quote, which is, a dream isn't is about bringing something into existence that wasn't here before, right? So again, through this journey, we hope that
Mm-hmm.
you all are able to dream and create, whatever feels good for you. And that we will share different examples that resonate with us through the book. We will share some of our personal experiences. But also feel free to, like, if what you want and seek is beyond what we bring up, to share that in the comments with us, to share your own stories, because that's what this space is really for, is for all of us to get creative and to just
Mm-hmm.
really, as a collective, just go through this, opening of what love and community can mean for us.
Yes, I'm really excited to dive deeper into this book. Like after reading chapter 1, it was really helping me feel like this ain't it. Like it helped me feel like what is subscribed here in the general society ain't it. And that's why I feel that dissonance. That's why I felt like, why don't I feel
Mhm.
like I'm adulting? Why don't I feel like I'm doing what is, cis het normative life or work life,
Mhm.
whatever it is. I'm like, why don't I not feel aligned with it? And so what we're hoping for with reading this book with y'all is to really dive into uh evolving our relationship dynamics and really opening
Mhm.
ourselves to a new. Speaking to a new, let's get into a new chapter. Chapter 2, Me and Us, self-care in the context of community. Y'all get comfortable because we are all about soul care. So this is a great chapter that I really is very familiar. The first one I was like, "Ooh, she's putting me on things I'm not really familiar with because I'm still under that veil." But chapter 2, I was like, "Yes, yes, 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 Mia." I was just yes anding her the entire time. So to root us in chapter 2, we want to ask y'all to collectively answer, what does self-care mean to you?
Mhm. Yeah, so for soul care, we talk about self-care, or we call it soul care all the
Mm-hmm.
time. That's our jam. But yeah, like before going into this chapter, when I saw like, oh, me and us, self-care in the context of community, I was like, okay, is it going to be about, like how do you, like what kind of tools do you use to, when you're in community to like, I don't know, I guess self-soothe or whatever, which
Mm-hmm.
is not exactly what we're talking about
Yes.
in this chapter. So I was kind of like, oh, okay, it's interesting how she used like self care to kind of integrate some of these other themes. But in general, I think of self care as like, taking care of your mind, body, soul, and spirit, and all that. And then with
And
sultry, then we
community.
add, yeah, I was going to say sultry, we add community.
Yes, I also think about radical self-care term by Angela Davis. Like in order to take care of each other, we need to take care of ourselves first. So that's the me and us. It's like I got to take care of me so I can take care of us. That's
Hmm.
what I think of when I think of self-care.
And Shonda, hello. Shonda shares that self care is pursuing all that brings us peace and rest. Ooh, I love
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
And then Kyle shares taking time to ask yourself what you need and doing what you can to get those needs met, including asking for help.
Yes.
That part.
Yes, me and us asking for help. I love that. Yes. Mhm.
Mhm. Exactly.
Mhm.
So thank you all for sharing. And yeah, like self care can mean a lot of different things. So feel free to keep sharing in the comments, or if you're watching the replay, to add what your specific definition of self care means.
So now we're going to segue into our first topic, which is individuality versus connectedness. And when we're talking about me and us, and I think Mia Birdsong is sharing that these two things can exist, individuality and connectedness. We can honor ourselves and what we individually need. Therefore, being able to, I think there was, I don't know if it was this chapter or the chapter 1 or chapter 2, there's something about seeing myself and seeing us. So I think
Hmm.
I always think about that too. Like when I think of self-care, like what do I need? And maybe how might someone need the same thing or something else?
Yeah, I definitely she went more into that in this chapter.
Hmm.
So the first quote I wanted to share is so when you think of this connectedness, like what does it mean when we talk about connectedness? It means committing to our own evolution and supporting the evolution of our loved ones as they support us. So I love
Hmm.
that about, self-care doesn't just mean only taking care of my needs and not caring about anyone else, right? She says committing to your own evolution, right? So taking care of yourself, but also supporting another's evolution, which I think is
Hmm.
also similar to Bell Hooks' definition of what love means, which is nurturing one's one's own and someone else's spiritual growth. So again, I think all these books that we read are definitely in conversation with each other. But I thought that was really important to talk about, that it's like, yeah, self-care does not have to just be about the individual.
Mhm. This is what I was trying to share at the beginning of chapter 2. The quote that is shared is, notice you among us." Akaya Winwood. I was like, that's, yeah.
Mhm.
So it's like, just I'm imagining like people like in the background and then you in the foreground, but you still are of that same tapestry or vision versus opposite, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I
Mhm.
think we're all just connected by way of how humans become humans, right? Like our
We all go
mother
through the
had to birth
threshold.
us. Yeah, like our mother had to birth us, and our mother then had to be connected with another person to then create a mini human to be birthed. And then they had
Ooh.
mothers, and then they had
Ooh.
partners, right? It's like, so we all are interconnected because we can't just plop onto the earth by ourselves yet. I hope that doesn't happen, but as of right now, the way humankind works, you have to be connected to at least one other human.
Tony the doula will update us if anything shall change in science. The next quote we wanted to share is, our individuality is intertwined with our connectedness. So the work of healing and growth happens both alone and in relation to others. And we talk about that so much in Sultry Sisters. We talk about collective healing. We talk about honoring ourselves while we also are in community with one another. It happens a lot when we have our events and when we have our gatherings online. We always remind people to like ground themselves in breath and honor themselves in the space. So if they need to take a step back, they can. If they want to speak up and share something, they can as well. So you can show up in whatever capacity you have that day in that moment.
Exactly. And the next quote I wanted to share is, we are the only ones who can decide we will heal and grow, but it's a collective process, right? So even when we do this self work, this internal work, which we'll talk about throughout this book, that it's still a collective, right? Because it's how we're interacting with other people, it's our interrelationships with other people. It's us as a collective, as a society. So I really appreciate her mentioning that too, and just stating that even though we can be healing ourselves and it can be an individual journey, that the individual journey is not isolated. It's still a part of the greater collective. And that's what we always talk about in Soul Tree when we talk about collective healing. That's why it's so important to us, because it's like, my healing will help, Alyssa's healing, her healing will help me. Our healing as a collective will then help others, right? So it's really important to just remind ourselves of that, because sometimes I think it can be um, challenging when we just think of our own journeys. Like, I think for me, when I
Mm-hmm.
think about like my mental health journey, and sometimes it's just like, dang, like these things are really hard. But when you think of it as like, oh, this is helpful in the collective, right? It's like, oh,
Mm.
asking for support, or even just knowing that me working on myself is helping, other people in my community.
Yes. That's Thank you for sharing that, Tony. And that makes me think of why we have this community discussion. That's why we have this book club. And we oftentimes will have different themes each month to have that community conversation so that we don't feel alone in our healing. And this quote that was shared in chapter 2 really makes me think of like why we create community to heal, why healing in
Hmm.
community can be so powerful. It's not the only thing. Obviously, you can heal at any time, but we're going to talk about mindfulness later, but this quote really rooted it down is, real listening always brings people closer together. Trust that
Hmm.
meaningful conversations can change your world. Rely on human goodness. Stay
Hmm.
together. Margaret Wheatley. I just really appreciated that because I'm like, yeah, part of healing and that accountability that we talked about in chapter 1 is real listening, right? It's
Hmm.
meaningful conversation and it's relying on human goodness, like assuming someone means well, right? When you're in an argument, just assume the person is coming to that conversation to resolve, not
Hmm.
to react.
Yeah. And also this chapter really, she went into what I put a little banner of. It's called like kind of healing the wounds of oppression. And so she kind of talks about how when we're talking about self-care, when we're talking about, the American dream, all of these
Mhm.
things, how it also is intertwined with oppression. Right? There's some groups that benefit from these
Mhm.
societal norms, and then there's groups that are oppressed because of these same exact norms. And so, one of the quotes that I wanted to share is that the work of recognizing and excavating the toxicity of the American dream, which we just talked about, each of us has inside of us, right? So, each of us has part of that American dream condition inside of us, is a lifelong work. These wounds, specifically personal and systemically personal, are intertwined. So I appreciate
Mhm.
that she mentions how it's not just personal, but also systemically it's
Right.
personal, right? So the system affects me, and also the system affects you.
Yeah,
Um,
that's why I
and then
appreciated that she was sorry, keep going.
Well, I was just going to tie in the next quote.
Yeah.
So then the next quote is, being on the receiving end of harmful oppressions is decidedly and specifically horrible, but wielding them has its own corrupting and denigrating impact on the imposer, right? So there's the American dream, there's white supremacy culture, there's capitalism, all these things, patriarchy, so many other things we can add. That has these oppressions that harm people, but also the oppressor can also be harmed in this. So she's saying that as a whole, collectively, it's important that we debunk and reject all of these things, because everyone is being harmed with all these systems.
Mhm. And I speaking of like healing wounds of oppression and just like living underneath systematic oppression, she was talking about in this chapter, like it can be easy to say like it if you feel like taking, getting your steps in or diet and nutrition like is not solving or not helping you feel better or relieved, it's not your fault, because there's bigger things that can make you feel stressed, that you won't feel relief after that bath, after that walk, after that tea, after that nap. And but it would be worse if we don't soothe ourselves, but
Mhm.
also like succumb to that, so that's when they talk about rest is resistance with Trisha Hersey. We read that book earlier this year. It's like to to know of the systems we are under is to also know ways to maroon your way out of them, to mentally
Mhm.
protect ourselves, to spiritually to protect ourselves. When we talk about soul care, sometimes your body's hurting, but can you protect your spirit? Can we protect our mind? Like, what are the
Mhm.
other ways in the system in which our body is of mind, body, spirit, community? How can we like practice that self-care, because it's not just the body, it's not just the vessel in which we live in. So I appreciated her saying like, if you feel like that stuff doesn't resonate, like it makes sense if your stress and pain come from greater things than I need a massage because I was walking all day. Like, so I liked how she emphasized that when we talk about self-care, I'm not talking about self-soothing things. She
Mhm.
mentioned like self-care is like doing the healing of like therapy,
Mhm.
getting the help you need, like the government, like the assistance you need, maybe from friends, from family, financial assistance, resources. It's like seeking resources and getting resources for housing and finance is a form of self-care. That prioritizing that versus taking a nap sometimes is more important, because that is what's going to help you feel that stress relief.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think it's always, it's a balancing act or a spectrum, right? Like, so sometimes those
Yes.
things can help to self-soothe. So yeah, and she wasn't saying that you shouldn't self-soothe.
Mm-mm.
She's saying that that's just one part of it. It's like when you think of that iceberg graphic that a lot of people will show, like the top of the iceberg is doing these self-soothing things, but below it is these big systemic oppressions, right? So if you're experiencing racism, sexism, if you are being pushed out of your homeland, if you are, being denied, a living wage, if you're experiencing, side effects of the climate crisis, all these different things can impact you in the fact that your well-being is like not going to be as best as it can. And doing these self-soothing practices is just, putting putting a little cream on the big wound, which is this big oppression.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah,
I
and that's
do.
what we talk about the wellness ecosystem, and there's different levels to it. So for us, what's having daily soul care practices, for me, it's a way to like, okay, if these things aren't providing like me me energy and rest, that means there's something deeper bothering me. So it allows me to actually not be numb to my pain. It allows me not to be numb to others' pain. It gives me that accountability. I account for myself. I'm like, okay, how are you doing? And if the things that I do for myself aren't enough, that it does mean and signify that there are outside sources, external things affecting me that maybe I don't have the power to change. So then it gives me a way to have a conversation with myself and be in community with others. Like there's some days I can say, hey, Tony, like I'm not feeling that great today. And that's how we can show up for each other. So yeah, I appreciate her talking about self-care with the me and us.
Mhm. And I think when you know, break out of that individual mindset and tell people you're going through a tough time and try to ask for support, then you realize people are like, oh, I'm going through the same thing too. That happens to me a lot. Like I'll actually be open and share something that's vulnerable, and people are like, oh, I experienced that too, or I felt that way too, or oh yeah, that is really tough. And then I think that's what helps, that connectedness, to know that we don't experience these oppressions and these um, different issues, that we
Mhm.
don't experience them alone, helps, I think, when you're in the journey, because it can be challenging a lot of times, but that kind of gives that support, gives you that boost to keep going.
Mhm.
Um, and then another thing I wanted to note that she mentioned is that the harm experienced by the oppressors is not equivalent to the harm experienced by the oppressed, right? So even though earlier
Mhm.
we mentioned that the system is bad for everyone, it is not equally bad for everyone.
Nope.
It is just bad in general. Um, and so I think that's really important when we think about, especially, current events happening. That yes, multiple people can be oppressed, but it's not equivalent. And that, through building community, through this collective healing, collective liberation, it's really about, how do we really make sure that the most oppressed
Mhm.
become free, become liberated, and then there's the trickle down of everyone else will also experience this freedom and this healing. But it's not vice versa. And so, sorry, it kind of goes into what she talked about, rejecting white supremacy culture, which is also what we just kind of talked about.
Mhm. And that takes us into
Oh wait, hold
self-awareness.
on, I
Oh, sorry,
wanted to
you
add
have a point?
something. Yeah, so, like, when she talks about white supremacy culture, I didn't add any quotes, but essentially she's saying it is a culture, right? So a culture is,
Mhm.
by definition, here, I pulled up the definition of culture so people can know if they're not aware already. But culture includes the customs, art, social institutions, and traditions and things like that of a
Mhm.
particular, people, nation, or social group, right? So when we talk about the U.S. specifically, and we bring up white supremacy culture, it's the norms, like the
Yeah.
American dream, capitalism, toxic individualism, all of those things fall under white supremacy culture, which through this book we're talking about rejecting and unlearning.
Yes, and she talks about, and I pulled it up here. When we hear white supremacy, we tend to think of the blatant visible racism of the Klansmen, the N-word, the modern day Nazis. I'm focused on the more mundane and insidious white supremacy that is embedded in American culture systems, institutions, and the dynamics of relationships and our own psyches. As Tema Okun points out in her piece, white supremacy culture, which Tony was bringing up, culture is powerful precisely because it is so present. At the same time, it is very difficult to name or identify. It's the pervasiveness and sometimes near visibility of white supremacy that makes it both hard to pull apart and toxic. There are a variety of downsides to white supremacy for white people. And then she goes into that too. But yeah.
Mhm.
Mm.
Exactly. And so when you think of it as a culture, right? It is something that we can unlearn and reject and break away from. Because I think, especially in the US, a lot of people are like, oh, are you calling me racist or whatever? Are you saying America is terrible and people should leave America because you don't want the American dream? It's like, we didn't say all of that. We're just saying this culture, these norms and traditions and institutions y'all created are not helpful and actually very oppressive.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's what we
So,
mean.
and so there's another part too. So I feel like, yeah, when we criticize America, people are like, well, then you don't like being, I'm like, well, and that's why I appreciate Mia, because she's like, where she's criticizing the American dream, not like geographically where we live. I'm like, why are you switching up the definition? But the American dream is white supremacy culture bound up with capitalism and patriarchy. Kyle mentioned this earlier. In
Hmm.
addition to espousing a belief that white people are superior to the people of color, white supremacy is also the culture of rigidity. Efficiency is more better. Ignorance is bliss. Scarcity, hoarding, binaries, and toxic individualism. So when we say white supremacy, that is what we're saying, white supremacy, not white people. We're talking about systems, behaviors, psyches, like false, I don't know, identifiers of like, yeah. Mhm.
Yes. So also people who are not socialized to be labeled as white can also exercise white supremacy culture and can also be
Mhm.
a part of the problem of
Yeah,
white
it's not
supremacy
just a
culture.
color. Mhm.
So it's a system. It is the culture at large. It's the system. It's the institution. It's all of the above. Okay.
Yeah, all of
So
it.
that's to ground us in like why she keeps talking about the American dream and all these things is because she's saying that white supremacy culture and the American dream combined with capitalism and everything Alyssa just shared is why a lot of these things that we just mentioned in chapter 1 is conditioned as
Yes.
normal.
And that's why for
Yeah.
me, I was bothered, like, as a Black and Filipina woman in the healness space, like wellness and art space, like the spiritual bypassing that happens when you're going through a tough time, and they want to be like, everybody breathe. I'm like, no, Becky, we're not just talking about everyone's hurting right now. That's not. And then you go and play like trap music while I'm doing yoga. I am just triggered all over. Um, That's where self-awareness and boundaries are important, y'all. This is where my healing needs to show up before I wreck myself, wreck everything. So I want to share this quote is that if self-awareness helps us notice when we're activated, which I was just, talking about, and running to our old stories and patterns, boundaries help us take responsibility for all of that and not take responsibility for other people's stuff when they're activated. So, yeah.
And I think the self awareness, again, as like we mentioned in chapter 1, it's just even becoming aware that you have these beliefs that been conditioned. It's okay to be like, oh, I didn't realize that maybe that isn't my belief. That's the self awareness. That's step 1 is like becoming aware that, like, oh, is this the actual family dynamic I want? Or is that just what people told me I should have? Or is that what I just saw everyone doing? So I thought that's my only option, right? Um, and then when it comes to boundaries, right, it's like, how do we protect ourselves in the name of self care, of soul care, right? To then make sure, we're being great community members for others, right? It's like we learned in the book Platonic last month is that,
Hmm.
you can show up for other people, but you have to also make sure that you're showing up for yourself, right? Like, okay, if you want a friend or a family member or your partner to show up in a certain way, like, are you also doing that for yourself? And I think that's what's really important because I think the American dream and nuclear family kind of pushes that, like, oh, the other person is just going to meet all your needs. So you don't have to meet your needs for yourself. I feel like a lot of times we think of like romantic partnerships, especially in like heterosexual dynamics. It's like, okay, your partner, you just live your life. And once you find your partner, then all your problems are going to go away because they're going to take care of all your needs. And it's like, maybe you should also want to take care of some of your needs yourself. So I think that's what's really important is when, especially when we talk about in the context of community, that like it's important to have boundaries. And we've also read Set Boundaries, Find Peace
Mhm.
before, and also Platonic. Those are two books we've read previously. So if you're like, what are they talking about? Go read those two books, go to our
Yes.
website, join our sanctuary.
Yeah, yeah, because when it comes to self-awareness and boundaries, for me, those two things have helped me. It will help you navigate and find out what community is for you. It'll help you find your chosen family. It'll help you find the right partner to do life with. So that's why we need to notice when we're activated, notice, what's our stuff, what's their stuff. And another thing I wanted to share from the book is from the section Showing Up for Ourselves. She says, the personal work we do to reject the American dreamism and create more well-being in our lives is necessary, not only for ourselves, but for our relationships. Taking care of ourselves and addressing our baggage helps us have workable relationships and care for others. So when I say baggage, I also mean like the baggage of the American dream, the baggage of white supremacy culture. I'm not talking about just that baggage of a breakup or the baggage of, little things. When I think of baggage, I'm talking about like the collective conditioning that we can be indoctrinated into, being in living in these oppressive systems.
Mhm. And so then you have here the power of mindfulness.
Oh yes, the power of mindfulness. So wrapping up this chapter, I really appreciated too when she talked about the power, because she's being that Mia Birdsong is a family activist and highlights how folks of low income have collectively come together to use their social capital. She also talks about like the accessibility of of wellness and how sometimes there's barriers to wellness economically, but the power of mindfulness is free. Um, uh, Trisha Hersey also talks about that. The power of mindfulness is pausing, breathing. Mindfulness doesn't cost a thing. So when it comes to self-care and taking care of ourselves, it doesn't always have to equate to something large and lavish. It can be literally checking in with ourselves, grounding with breath, and using what we have. So that's a lot what she talks about is relying on
Mhm.
others. Maybe that's a phone call to a friend. If you can't afford therapy, there are other ways that you can check in with yourself, get something off your chest, and receive the emotional, financial, and support and resources you need to feel that sense of relief.
Mhm.
So I like the power of mindfulness being like accessible. And part of the mindfulness, after reading these two chapters, is knowing when you need to ask for help. That's mindfulness. Like mindfulness doesn't need to necessarily mean a meditation. It's like, hey, could I use some help right now? Can I call a
Mhm.
friend? Can I say, hey, I need, I need some extra support here. Can I, that's for me, the power of mindfulness is it's for us to check with ourselves
Mhm.
so that we can have that interconnectedness. We can practice that communal collective care.
Mhm. And the next section I wanted to highlight is the importance of community. So she mentions, uh, she shares a quote by Ruby Sales. So it is in
Mhm.
community and in relationship with others that we locate a self that we can never find being isolated. It is in community and in relationship with each other that we come to know the consciousness and the spirit of God that is in each of us. And I thought that was such a beautiful quote because, yeah, that just shows how like individuality is only a part of the full picture, right? That like
Mhm.
when we are connected to others, when we're in community, when we have these right relationships, then that makes us closer to our highest self, right? So
Mhm.
there's like, the regular self and then there's our higher self. And so I think that's so beautiful, especially when we talk about, our different healing journeys, that the community can really help be a mirror and be a support,
Mhm.
and be a foundation for us while we're, creating the communities we want for ourselves, that, to also open our eyes and see that we do have people around us. Because I think sometimes also, I know I do this sometimes where I'm focused on the negative stuff, but I think also this book can provide a space to pause and also to appreciate the people or the spaces or even just this book as, something that is, a guiding light for the type of community that we want to create.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And riffing off of that, the last topic I wanted to touch upon is interdependence outside of coupledom. So this is like in relation to Platonic, the last book we
Mhm.
read, and which is why we really wanted to follow up Platonic with How We Show Up, because we wanted to continue to remind ourselves and our community that that nuclear family and that romantic relationship doesn't have to be the focus. That is part of the American dream, that mirage of security that, oh, if I have that one person, I'm good. If I do this, I'm good. And so I appreciate the chapter of the book talking about how we can be someone else's emergency contact. We can decide to like, hey, like, you're going to do that surgery, I'm going to make sure to take off to take care of you. We can ask people outside, our significant others and family, to take care of us. We can put that into like writing. We can also, and she gives a beautiful example of her and her friend Mariah, who has diabetes, of how she shows up for her. And I just thought that was really beautiful, because as a person who is like in my 30s and single, like, the person that I put on my emergency contact is Tony. She's like my person. Like, if, I'm, gone tomorrow, she's getting all this stuff behind me. I mean, it's not about those things, but I'm just saying, like, I used to be a person that thought like really focused, and we talked about in the Platonic book, I really thought my life, my adult life, started when I had a partner, specifically a romantic partner. And with Platonic, Sultry Sisters, and this book, my life has already began and significantly has blossomed because of the friendships and communities I've intentionally decided to pour into and develop strong bonds within.
Yeah. And in the book, she specifically points out how, like, when people say significant other, it's been conditioned to mean your romantic sexual partner. And she's
Mm-hmm.
like, what a, kind of what a waste of a term for your
Right.
significant other to be limited to just the person you're like having sex with. Right. So it's like, yeah, like when I think of significant others, like, oh, whoever is important in my life, right? And that can look like a myriad of things and people. So I think that's something we can, kind of reflect on over the next week is like, who are the significant people in your life? What does that look like? How are they showing up for you? How are you
Mhm.
showing up for them? Because in the example she gives us in the book, it's really about that mutuality, right? Like they both were able to show up for each other in a different way. And especially when you have people in your life who have different needs or who have
Mhm.
different, circumstances that need different types of support, like to actively ask the people who you consider significant,
Mhm.
like, what allergies do you have? Like, what is your point of
Mhm.
contact? What's your address? Whatever. Like, I have some of my friends like location. Um,
Mhm.
on iPhones, I can
Giving a
know
friend a key to your apartment.
mhm. I have that so
Mhm.
we can know for safety reasons. Yeah, I've, like, given people my key. I have, told people, different people's address that I go to frequently. So if I ever somehow they don't know where I am, they have a few places to
Mhm.
start looking. Because I think especially in this digital age now, even though we're sort of more interconnected, we're also more separate because you're not always going to someone's house or knowing like, oh, their house is number 501. They're like, oh, I know they kind of live on this street, but if
This
I
is a mir-
can
this
see,
is a this is sorry. This is a mirage of security. Because we have this, you don't even know no one's number. You don't even know their location. You don't even know their whereabouts, because you're like, oh, I'll see it. No, this is also a mirage of security. And so, like what Tony's saying, like
yeah,
physically and intentionally telling people these things, that gives the opportunity for people to show up when you need it.
yeah. So like also, I invite you all to whoever the list of people who you consider significant,
Mhm.
your community, your chosen family, to exchange that information so you can, make sure you're able
Mhm.
to show up for them when something happens. And I think that's something that's like a next step that I want to do, because I'm
Mhm,
like, oh yeah, that is true. I have thought about that certain
mhm.
times, but I think it's also good to
Yes.
update information because some people might change certain things. So that's really important.
Mhm, and we've done this, uh, exercise in our Radical Soul Care workshop, which is, um anyways, I don't know if we have it on YouTube. If we do, look it up. We have some of our workshops online, but we give you some homework. So if you're thinking, okay, like this book, How We Show Up, is talking about reclaiming our relationships with our friends, family, and community. I want you to do some journaling homework, and I want you to make 3 circles, family, friends, and community, and name those people, name those places, name those things so that like what you have, and you can say, okay, I have more in this one, and you can kind of round it out. We talk about being like well-being, well-rounded, our wellness ecosystem, and part of the wellness ecosystem we're focusing on for the month of October is our relationship. So we invite you to do that kind of introspection and journaling, and come back and share with us. We'll share with you ours. And to close out, I want to share an Audre Lorde quote, because as we are like unlearning the American dream and really creating our own queer relationships, new relationships, I want to impart with you this quote: the speaking will get easier and easier, and you will find you have fallen in love with your own vision, which you may have never realized you had. And you will lose some friends and lovers and realize you don't miss them, and new ones will find you and cherish you. And at last, you'll know with surpassing certainty that the only thing that is more friendly than speaking your truth is not speaking at all. Audre Lorde.
Hmm.
So speak your truth, y'all. Call in the community, the friends and family that you desire, you yearn for. You deserve it. We deserve to, be loved. And like that's the one quote too. Like we deserve to, family and community is where we find belonging, care, and love, and we deserve all those things. Oops. We're both trying to press it. So yeah, how y'all feeling after reading chapter 1 and 2? Let us know in the comments how you feeling.
Yeah, I feel like 1 and 2 definitely, sets the tone for the rest of the book, which I appreciate, that we really are about, unlearning all of this other stuff to get to the root, which is, what does community mean for us? What does these, right relationships mean for us? And how it really is individual. Like throughout the rest of the chapters, she will share different types of stories and people's dynamics that, you might not have ever known anyone with that kind of dynamic, or you might be in that current dynamic. And so I think that's going to be really exciting to really explore, what these different relationships and community structures can look like. Because I think that can also help us get inspiration. So I think this so far reading chapters 1 and 2 is like inspiring of like, oh yeah, we can
Mhm.
really dream up and create, it's limitless, right? It's like we really can just be full of abundance and love. And I'm looking forward to learning more and hearing from you all too as you tune in.
Yes, same here. I'm feeling open. I'm really excited and eager for the conversation and discourse. I like the quote earlier we shared. It's like, it's really important for us to learn about the different ways people show up for each other, the different relationship styles, so we can create and curate our own. So please don't be shy. Let us know. We want to be really interactive and conversational throughout the rest of this book club series.
Awesome. And we have Shonda sharing. It's been very relevant to what I am learning and exploring so I can apply to my life. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining. And we hope you continue to join us on Wednesdays. And if you all haven't already, you can join our book club online. So there's this website called
Mhm.
Book Clubs. It's free, and you also have an app option. And so essentially on there, you can see all of our current books we're reading, all of our previous books, the link to our previous book clubs, and you'll find the links and you'll get reminders every week and a day before, and I believe the day of, that our book club is starting. So if you're like, I always miss it, I don't know why I never can remember, join the book club. So you'll get alerts to your email or you'll get alerts on the app. And you'll also just stay up to date what we're currently reading. And if you love this book club today and you're like, I need to get my hands on the book, you can look at our bookshop to get the book there.
Yeah, and Tony's sharing that all in the comments. And upcoming events, y'all. Upcoming events, we have Tony teaching Soul Flow Yoga this Sunday at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Please join us for a nice mindful movement flow. And then we have our sustainable swap coming up in November. So definitely join our newsletter to be updated. Otherwise, we really enjoyed the book club with y'all this week, and we'll see you next Wednesday.
Yes, we'll see you all then. And don't forget to donate. You can Venmo and PayPal us to support and subscribe to our YouTube because we're trying to get more numbers up. So definitely don't miss out because we got all this juicy, juicy goodness up there. So we'll see you all next week. Until then, bye.
Bye.